you find yourself confined in a damp stone cell deep beneath the most colossal arena ever constructed. Overhead, 50,000 Romans have just witnessed your husband torn apart by a lion. The audience is dispersing. The torchlight is fading. Then you catch the sound of footsteps, heavy and measured, drawing nearer. A silhouette blocks your doorway. It is the gladiator who emerged alive from today's slaughter. His body is still streaked with blood not his own. A guard turns the key in the lock. The gladiator gestures toward you. This is no invention from a nightmare tale. This was an ordinary afternoon in the Roman world. What I am about to reveal is the aspect of Roman history omitted from classrooms, the organized, government-endorsed terror that unfolded once the crowds departed. This is not conjecture. Roman authors recorded it themselves, and the proof remains etched into the stone beneath the Colosseum. If you remain until the conclusion, your perception of ancient Rome will be forever altered. For generations, Hollywood has misled audiences about gladiators. Movies such as Gladiator depict the combat, the courage, the uprising. They omit what transpired in the quiet hours after the spectacles concluded, when public entertainment gave way to something far more depraved. I speak of a practice so appalling that contemporary scholars coined a new Latin expression for it: Victoria carnalis, the carnal victory. The Romans themselves never coined such a phrase because to them it required no special designation. It was routine. Here is what is firmly established. Roman authors, including Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca, portrayed a reality in which women taken in war were stored below the amphitheaters and allocated as rewards. Not figuratively, literally dispensed like provisions to successful gladiators. The Roman state, the very administration, managed this arrangement with the same meticulous organization they applied to constructing aqueducts and highways. Consider that reality. The same culture that invented durable concrete and republican institutions also systematized the mass exploitation of sexual violence. Before delving further, I ask you to do one thing. Glance at the like button now. If you feel concealed aspects of the past merit exposure, no matter how unsettling, press it and leave a comment stating your location, because this account concerns not only Rome, it concerns what empires inflict when unobserved. Now, descend with me into the hypogeum. To grasp what transpired in those subterranean rooms, you must first understand how Rome transformed living people into commodities. This was not sporadic brutality. It was methodical dehumanization executed on a vast scale. And it commenced the instant Roman forces subdued a new territory. When Rome crushed resistance in Gaul or annihilated a settlement in Judea, they did not merely prevail in battle. They processed entire populations like an assembly line of suffering. Men of fighting age were dispatched to labor in quarries or arenas until death. Children were marketed in slave auctions throughout the provinces. Women were designated as war spoils, state-owned prizes. Here, the chilling truth emerges. Roman jurisprudence no longer regarded these individuals as persons. They fell under the category of res, objects, chattel, the identical classification as household goods or cattle. A captive woman possessed no greater legal standing than a table. Any act inflicted upon her carried no criminal weight. One cannot perpetrate an offense against property. Yet Rome did not dehumanize solely through statutes. They dehumanized through spectacle. The games served not merely as diversion, but political theater engineered to psychologically subdue both the vanquished and Rome's own populace. When spectators observed a captured Germanic leader battling a lion, they witnessed not merely death, they witnessed Rome proclaiming the fate awaiting any who challenge its rule. And during the midday interval, when the aristocracy departed for their meals, the true depravity unfolded. Historians label these midday executions fatal charades, staged mythological reenactments in which the condemned performed legendary tales, except the fatalities were genuine.
The poet Martial, composing in the late 1st century AD, recounts these episodes with unsettling detachment, as though appraising a performance. He describes a prisoner costumed as Orpheus, the mythical bard whose melodies could tame beasts. They escorted him into the arena, released a bear. Martial remarks with faint disappointment that on this occasion, the music failed. The bear mauled the man to death, while 50,000 onlookers consumed sweetened dates. In another passage, and I caution you, this is profoundly disturbing, Martial depicts a woman compelled to enact the myth of Pasiphae, who coupled with a divine bull. For this captive, it translated to public violation by an animal before thousands until her injuries proved fatal. Reconsider that statement. The Roman authorities devised a procedure in which human beings were sexually assaulted to death by beasts as midday entertainment. This was no aberration of a deranged ruler. It constituted standard protocol for decades. Senators escorted their offspring to witness. Placards advertised the program citywide. Vendors hawked refreshments. Martial himself comments that whatever myth narrates, the arena realizes. Yet he offers this observation as praise for the system's precision. This was the milieu, this mechanized bureaucratic apparatus of cruelty that also channeled conquered women into the reward structure for gladiators. Now consider the recipients of these rewards. Gladiators inhabited a paradoxical existence Rome never fully reconciled. They ranked among society's lowest yet most celebrated figures, enslaved individuals with less legal worth than livestock, yet idols whose likenesses adorned mosaics and whose names were scrawled on walls by admirers. Aristocratic women fixated upon them. Surviving graffiti from Pompeii hails one fighter as the girl's sigh and another as the lady's delight. Records document patrician matrons slipping into gladiator schools, bribing sentries for clandestine meetings. The gladiator Sergius reportedly conducted liaisons with several wedded noblewomen, sparking major scandals. Stranger still, their bodily secretions became merchandise. Gladiators' sweat, gathered post-combat, blended with olive oil, and marketed as an aphrodisiac and cosmetic. Reflect on that degree of idolization. These were enslaved combatants whose sweat fetched profit among the elite. Yet Rome lived in perpetual dread of these men. The Spartacus uprising of 73 BC seared itself into collective memory. 78 gladiators escaped, assembled an army exceeding 70,000, and nearly toppled the Republic. For 2 years they routed legion after legion. When finally subdued, Rome crucified 6,000 along the Appian Way, one corpse every 40 meters across 200 kilometers, a continuous line of crosses from Rome to Capua. That trauma lingered indelibly. Every gladiator who grasped a blade, every lanista who operated a training school, every spectator in the stands recalled how perilously close these men had come to incinerating Rome. So how does one manage exceptionally perilous, exceptionally valuable individuals harboring legitimate grievances and lethal expertise? Through severe discipline combined with calculated incentives, additional rations, monetary prizes, manumission after sufficient victories. Yet sources allude to something more instinctual: access to captive women. The evidence here remains fragmented and oblique. Roman writers mention it casually, as though too commonplace to elaborate. Yet when fragments from martial, juvenile, and subsequent texts are assembled alongside knowledge of military rewards and slave administration, a consistent pattern surfaces. After an especially impressive performance, particularly during lavish imperial or senatorial games, gladiators who prevailed and excelled received what ancient sources euphemistically term victor's privileges. Modern scholars, interpreting the subtext and cross-referencing military practices, conclude this frequently included access to female war captives detained beneath the arena. The procedure appears disturbingly administrative. The gladiator, still clad in armor and caked with arena sand and blood, would be escorted into the hypogeum, the extensive subterranean complex below the fighting floor. Past animal pens and lifting mechanisms, they reached a distinct sector of holding cells.
These were no ordinary confinement rooms. Excavations at amphitheaters, including Capua, Pompeii, and the Colosseum itself, disclose compact chambers featuring distinctive characteristics: stone platforms along walls, iron rings fastened at waist and floor levels, externally locking doors. Certain rooms retain fixed chains anchored to the structure. The women confined therein were termed captive damnatae, condemned war captives. They had already passed through Rome's conquest bureaucracy. Their identities appeared in ledgers maintained by officials known as commentariensis, who inventoried state assets. Each received a number and classification by origin: Germanica, Britannica, Parthica. The gladiator would be presented a line of cells. Some testimonies suggest selection was permitted. Others indicate assignment occurred mechanically, akin to issuing equipment. Regardless, a guard would unbolt the designated door, the woman would be removed or the gladiator admitted, and the lock secured once more. What ensued lacks explicit depiction in extant sources, yet the architecture speaks plainly. The texts remain reticent. What renders this especially insidious is that it constituted no infraction. Most Romans regarded it as morally neutral. It formed an operational expense of the games. The mechanics of Victoria carnalis were overseen by the same functionaries who arranged beast hunts and maintained equipment.
From the state's viewpoint, the arrangement resolved multiple objectives efficiently. It compensated loyal gladiators at negligible cost. Captive women incurred no expense, they were already spoils. It reinforced the gladiators' perception of dominance without granting genuine autonomy, and it transmitted a dual message. To the gladiator and to subjugated populations alike, this exemplifies Roman hegemony. Your arena success confers the identical prerogative the emperor exercises: unrestricted authority over the defeated. One anonymous Roman author, preserved in later quotations, stated bluntly, "The victor claims his prize in the same fashion the empire claims its provinces, by right of conquest." Let us examine the physical environments where this transpired, because the archaeology is irrefutable. When 19th-century excavators first probed beneath the Colosseum, their focus rested on engineering marvels: the elevator mechanisms raising beasts, the corridors transporting personnel. Yet continued investigation uncovered unexpected chambers serving no apparent logistical function. These rooms measure small, typically 15 to 20 square meters, and occupy an isolated section of the hypogeum, distant from animal enclosures and gladiator quarters. Their features unsettle modern archaeologists: stone benches constructed at precise elevations, iron rings secured at varying heights from floor to shoulder, heavy iron-reinforced doors bolting externally. Several walls display scratch marks, desperate attempts to claw through solid rock. The 3rd-century historian Cassius Dio refers to subterranean spaces for those awaiting their use beneath major amphitheaters. The wording is intentionally ambiguous, yet contextually it pertains to game logistics and human asset management. The most harrowing testimony emerges from graffiti. In the hypogeum beneath Capua's amphitheater, the very locale where Spartacus initiated his revolt, excavators discovered wall scratches, some in Latin, others in provincial tongues. Most fragmentary, yet several legible. One, inscribed in rudimentary Latin by a non-native, translates approximately, "I was Aemilia of the Brigantes. I saw my children slain. Now I am nothing." Another, apparently Celtic, renders roughly, "To whatever deity hears, grant death before tomorrow." These are voices history rarely preserves. Roman annals chronicle emperors and commanders, victories and monuments. They ignore the identities of women catalogued as chattel. Yet, the stones endure. The very design reveals intent, efficiency, and repetition. These chambers were not improvised sites of assault. They were purpose-engineered, maintained facilities tailored for their function. Compare this standardization to other arena infrastructure: gladiator barracks, beast pens, armories, and the pattern clarifies. The captive chambers conform precisely. This was state-constructed infrastructure for systematic violation. Certain scholars caution against overinterpretation, suggesting alternative uses for these rooms, or projection of contemporary sensibilities onto equivocal evidence. Yet, combining architecture, literary allusions, Roman military culture, and elementary operational logic yields an inescapable conclusion. Now confront the most painful dimension: what this system signified for the women ensnared within it. History offers almost no personal accounts, no journals, no direct testimony. What survives are ledgers enumerating them as numerals and inventories describing them as livestock. Female Germanica, circa 20 years, sound condition, assigned to Colosseum detention. Yet we can reconstruct their ordeal from established conquest procedures. These women derived from contexts of absolute devastation. When Rome subdued resistant regions during the Dacian campaigns or Boudicca's British revolt, the aftermath followed military routine. After decisive engagement, civilians underwent processing. Combat-age males slain or condemned to hard labor, young children separated for Eastern slave markets, never to reunite with kin or homeland. Women of reproductive age classified as captive and transported in fetters to arena facilities. For such a woman, the journey to the hypogeum already comprised multiple torments. You had seen your village incinerated, watched your children ripped away shrieking, endured chaining alongside dozens of others, and forced marches spanning hundreds of miles to Rome, been stripped, inspected like merchandise, assigned a serial number, and sealed in a cell beneath the grandest monument erected by the civilization that annihilated your world. The anticipation itself constituted torture. You heard everything. The crowd's thunder as acquaintances perished in inventive ways for amusement, animal roars, cheers for skillful kills. You understood escape was impossible. No ransom existed, no exchange. Rome negotiated not with the defeated. Your distant kin, if any survived, would never learn your fate. You simply vanished into imperial machinery. Then came the footsteps, the door opening, the selection, the lock engaging you on the interior alongside a man fresh from killing for sport. Roman law afforded no recourse. You could not petition magistrates because legally you lacked personhood. Even self-destruction, one escape occasionally respected in Roman culture, would deprive the state of property. Your corpse would still serve differently. This represented civilizational psychological warfare. The degradation of conquered women formed no byproduct of Roman policy. It constituted intentional strategy. The objective: shatter resistance so thoroughly that succeeding generations would never contemplate defiance. Ancient texts state this explicitly. Following the Jewish revolt's suppression in 70 AD, Josephus records deliberate distribution of Jewish women among legions and games to demonstrate to survivors the forfeiture not merely of sovereignty, but of capacity to shield families. The declaration rang clear: oppose Rome, and behold your daughter's destiny. Occasionally, the apparatus faltered unexpectedly. Despite its mechanized cruelty, Rome remained fixated on preserving illusions of its own character. The empire perceived itself as civilizer, imposing order upon barbarians. That self-conception demanded certain atrocities remain veiled. This brings us to an incident that momentarily exposed the system: female gladiators. On exceedingly rare occasions, women entered the arena as combatants. Sources conflict regarding their identities. Some undoubtedly enslaved and compelled. Others appear noble women who, in a society granting females scant agency, regarded the arena as a twisted avenue to power and renown. Their existence scandalized the American elite. Juvenal satires drip contempt for aristocratic women training with gladiatorial arms. What modesty remains in a woman donning a helmet? In 200 AD, Emperor Septimus Severus witnessed games in Antioch featuring female fighters. Cassius Dio, present, records the Greek spectators responding with gravity, granting them solemnity accorded male combatants. Roman attendees, however, jeered, hurled lewd remarks, treating the spectacle as obscene farce. The women were not perceived as warriors, but as erotic objects misplaced in a death arena. Severus reportedly felt mortified, not by the violence, but by his countrymen's inability to distinguish combat from sexuality when females participated. He consequently prohibited women from arena combat entirely. Reflection: the concern was not shielding women from harm. Female captives continued detention in these very chambers. The issue was visibility. Public exposure undermined the game's dignity, Rome's propaganda instrument. The emperor tolerated the abuse provided it occurred privately, in shadows where it belonged. The practice persisted long after Severus's edict. It merely receded into the hypogeum's obscurity, where it had always chiefly operated. What should truly alarm is this: the system ended not through ethical awakening. Gladiatorial contests endured centuries, persisting decades post-Christianization in the 4th century. The final documented combat occurred in 404 AD, when monk Telemachus intervened and was dismembered by an enraged crowd. Only then did Honorius abolish the games permanently. Even that decree failed to terminate subterranean captivity. The infrastructure endured. War captive acquisition remained standard military practice into Byzantine times. The apparatus gradually ceased, not from moral evolution, but from imperial collapse. Conquest halted. Captive supply dwindled. The institution perished from resource scarcity, not conscience. Today, visitors photograph themselves before the Colosseum's majestic arches, admiring ancient engineering. Guides recount gladiatorial bouts and venetiones. Few mention the chambers below. The stones persist. Wall-mounted rings remain unoxidized. Fingernail gouges endure beneath dust layers. Ledgers cataloging humans as inventory rest in Vatican archives and European museums, accessible to researchers. We discuss no isolated episodes. This was policy, infrastructure, normality. The Colosseum endures as testament to empire's true nature, not solely celebrated architecture and triumphs, but the systematic horror sustaining absolute dominion. Every block was purchased not merely with coin, but with lives deliberately eradicated through humanity's most organized cruelty. The arena spectacle constituted only the visible portion Rome wished displayed. The remainder transpired in those subterranean rooms after the crowd's din subsided. Those silenced voices, deemed unworthy of record by chroniclers, are preserved in the walls for any willing to listen. And that is the history absent from textbooks. If this revelation disclosed something previously unknown to you, subscribe and enable notifications. We will continue exposing the erased past. Share your reflections in comments. I will meet you in the next exploration of history's shadowed recesses.